a wee bit of a confession. Sort of. Well, I mentioned that sometimes it's hard to decipher my own notes. Another thing is, you know, when I prepare myself to do my series of Halloween Horror Nights history videos, I go back and go to various resources on the internets and other places, go through my memorabilia and reflect and ponder and recollect all of my memories and sort of coalesce them together into a sort of structure so that I can recall easily to mind when I do the presentation what about the event. You know, a few notes here to remind me of a couple of key points, and I'm all ready to go. Trouble is, I did that months ago, months ago. And some of that is not so fresh in my memory anymore. So a couple of times I may go, what the hell was, you know, it's like, I was such an eager hurry to get back and start doing these once I realized I could, and I got the technical problem solved. I didn't go back over all the material again. I thought, well, I can do it. So a couple of times you may see me having what they sometimes call a senior moment, which really irks me because I don't feel old. I know. I'm old enough to be some of you guys' grandparents, but, well, not your grandparents, because that would be two people, and never mind. I should be able to do it, but you know, I just want to apologize. Like the Bill and Ted show, I'm trying to think, okay, what did I mean when I put that down, and what exactly happened during that frickin' show? And I think I know, and I think I'll do all right, but we'll see. Probably won't get to that in this video anyway. Alright, I was originally going to be watching, it's about 8 o'clock now. I originally wasn't going to go into this. I was going to go ahead and do New York 1. There's a show I like on Saturday nights called On Stage about theater in New York, but it got preempted because of Newt Gingrich. Another reason to hate him. But, so, why do I need to have the frickin' South Carolina primary news on New York 1? I mean, every other news station is going to cover that. You're going to have it on MSNBC and Fox. You know, you can see whichever side you like is going to discuss the way you want to hear about it, the way you're on the right or the left. Or you can watch CNN, which is somewhere in the middle, or any other news station or network news or whatever, and find out all about that. It doesn't have to be on New York 1 at 7:30 on a Saturday night, which is a weekly show. It's only on once a week called On Stage. Why? You're pissing off the theater fags. Just want you to know that, Newt Gingrich. We're going to get you. Okay. Alright, where am I? Scare zones. That's what we came to. Scare zones. Yeah. Now, officially, there was only one scare zone at Halloween Horror Night 17 Carnival of Carnage. It would encompass the entire park. The Carnival of Carnage itself, the midway of the bazaar, would be the entire park, would be the huge scare zone. And in some ways, this was accomplished, sort of, by going actually beyond the front gate. Even as you approach, you have the caravan, Jack's Caravan, out front, in front of the gates as you enter into the park, and the Ferris wheel that actually spun with Jack's face in the middle, hanging from the archway. So it was kind of cool that you kind of had some atmosphere, some atmosphere happening before you even went in the gates. But once you went in, there was stuff going on in a lot of different areas that sort of fit in with the carnival theme. But was it all one big scare zone? Not really. Really, there were 4 scare zones, actually. There were 4 scare zones. You know, some of it, like they had the big Ferris wheel over by Men in Black and some stuff like that, but there weren't any dead bodies hanging off of it, and you couldn't ride it yourself, you know. Oh well. So in some ways that failed a little bit. But there were 4 scare zones, actually. Unofficially, but there were. The first one was called Killer Carnies. In the New York streets area, you had a lot of, you know, circus freak, carnival clown type people running around, like you have had at Midway the Bazaar in the past, but they were in New York Street. And And the only really effective scare zone, as far as I thought, was on the pathway between the Gardens of Allah and Central Park, that wooded area. It became what they called Troupe Macabre. And Troupe Macabre was like sort of Cirque du Soleil kind of old-fashioned circus troupe of vampires. So you have this guy with a violin playing, and he's dressed in old, sort of old French, early late 19th century clothing or something, and little girls with pirouettes and parasols and whatever. But it was all like a troupe of a performing, maybe commedia dell'arte or something like that. But they were vampires. It's sort of artistic and yet kind of creepy, scary at the same time, with a sort of weird, evil carnival music playing through there. I liked it. I thought it was kind of effective, and the vampires were a hell of a lot better than the ones in the house Bloodbath. Unfortunately, the rest of these so-called scare zones were mainly just filling some dead space with something, because there have been complaints. So a little bit later in the event, they threw some Treeks and Foons, like they had over Islands Adventure in previous events, 2002, 2003. They put them in Shrek Alley, actually, not New York Street. So put them in Shrek Alley, these Treeks and Foons running around. And on Hollywood Boulevard, they had similar characters and sort of clown cars driving around. And on Plaza of the Stars, sort of, what they call it, the Motor Maniacs, sort of clown cars with insane clowns, which actually look more silly than scary. And the Treeky things really kind of, they didn't even look like the Treeks and Foons. They sort of looked like giant candy drops that, aren't you scared? One of them came up to me, aren't you scared to be here by yourself? Because I walked through that area and there's no one else there. And the very bored character in the costume came up to me, aren't you scared to be by yourself? And it was like it was a girl actually, trying to, and I said, oh, I'm not scared. The voices in my head keep me company. It's sad when I can be creepier than the character. But, oh well. Oh. So those were our scare zones. Not that much. It was not a good year for scare zones, but they made up for that since then, thank God. Now, showtime! There were shows that year, some wonderful shows, actually. Yes, they had 4 shows, actually, as far as I'm concerned. The first was the Freak Show. Now, this was in the Animal Actors Auditorium. But they also had something going on outside the Animal Actors Auditorium, immediately outside, where in recent years they've had scare zones occasionally. Just outside the auditorium, they had our old pal, the Enigma. I may have mentioned him in a previous one. I should have, around the 2002 history ones. The Enigma is a fellow who is an actual sideshow performer. He's got his entire body tattooed like a jigsaw puzzle. And there's also another guy named Lizard Man who's all scales and fangs, who's similar looking. But the Enigma is a very, very classy looking fellow. And he did some of his routine, some humor, and also I think, I don't know what gags, I can't remember what gags he did, but there's like the old needle through the cheek gag and a few other freakish things that, will cause the rubes to go, that's So he did that sort of stuff, but in his pattern, his routine was pretty good, and highly politically charged, actually, which I thought was quite funny, for me, at least. Then after that, we made our way into the Animal Actors Auditorium for the Freak Show, which was actually a magic show. Now, there were a couple of different acts that performed throughout the course of Carnival of Carnage. I did not see one of the later acts. The only one I saw was Brian Brushwood. He didn't perform through the entire 23 days. There was another act that came in and replaced him at some point. But I saw Brian Brushwood's show, and it's pretty much the same show that he had presented later on, a couple of years after. And, Mr. Happy Pants, the evil puppet, and also the trick with the cell phones, which for me was the biggest scare of Halloween Horror Nights 2007. Now, I had not seen this show before. Now, when Brian Brushwood came back in later years, oh yeah, you know what's going to happen. That first night that I saw Brian Brushwood performing, and he did the trick with the cell phones, when Captain Howdy appeared on the screen, I leapt about 5 feet out of my chair. It was for me, oh my God, it was the biggest scare for the entire event. There was no shock or scare, and there were some decent scares here and there, but that for me was like, oh my God. You know, it seems kind of silly now, especially since he's been back a couple more times and he's done the same gag. But at the time, it was like, holy fuck. So I really enjoyed it. Now, I did not see what act came after him, which I think was also a magic act or some kind of stunt act that I didn't see, so I can't really describe it. A new show occurred this year in the Beetlejuice Auditorium. It was called the Rocky Horror Picture Show Tribute. What they did was, and it was rather clever to have it there because there's a castle set already for the Beetlejuice show. And so they would have used that existing set as Frankenfurter's castle. And they have a screen up with clips and scenes from the Rocky Horror Picture Show, while simultaneously actors would perform the Rocky Horror Picture Show scenes along with. It wasn't the entire show, of course. I think they would have to pay royalties for that. I'm not sure what they had to get the rights in order to do this anyway, but they did select scenes and numbers from the show. There were certain characters that weren't in it. Eddie was not in it, and so his numbers were not in it. But other scenes and numbers, most of the big numbers were there. And it was done quite well, and I enjoyed it tremendously, particularly because a lot of the audience interaction was going on. People who had gone to the Rocky Horror Picture Show or had seen it performed live and know the interactive gag response that happens for various scenes, and there's always new ones that come up over the time, but it was made for a really lively entertainment. And at the same time, there was something that added to it, at least this first year. The last time they did this a couple years ago, it wasn't so good because it didn't seem to be going on. But this year, that first time, it was awesome because there was a sign language interpreter for the deaf. I'm sorry, I don't know Amislang, but so this is not legitimate sign language. But yeah, I may have just been cursing everyone out. I don't know. Yeah. That's cursing. Okay, never mind. But the sign language person not only did the sign language for what was being said in the show, in the lyrics of the songs, but also for the audience responses. And sometimes, for example, see androids fighting, Brad and Janet. Well, the audience see androids fighting and fucking and sucking Brad and Janet. And so the sign language did it for those, I forget what fucking was, but it was like, or whatever, and sucking was, it was like, oh my God. And it was like, I found myself getting distracted by watching the sign language because some of her inventive ways of coming up with what the audience, some of the filthy shit that was coming out of the audience, it was like, oh my Lord. Oh, I just had to laugh. It was terrific. I enjoyed it very much. It was a great show. Rocky Horror Picture Show Tribute. I think it was best that first year. They did it a couple more times, I think in 2008 and 2009. But that first year really, maybe because of the shock of the new, I really enjoyed it tremendously. All right. Now, there were two more shows. The Carnival of Carnage show was set up in the Mel's Diner area. They had a stage there like they used to have in the old days when they had disc jockeys or they had whatever, or where the Arrival show had been back in 2006. So this was set up for a show at Jack. This show introduced the character of Chance. Now, Chance, of course, has her legacy goes back to a character called Jill, who was going to be a part of Halloween Horror Nights in 2001, I believe, or 2002. Maybe it's 2001. Yeah, One of the ideas they had after Jack was, okay, this is Jill. This was like Jack's ex-girlfriend who killed him. And now I've run out of time again, so I'll get to that next time.